Basslines is sponsored by Hug Your Money. Seeking financial freedom? Your Hug financial coach can help. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented.
Hello and welcome to Basslines. I'm Frances Rayam. You might know me as the Money Doctor, but I'm also a vocalist. And this show is not about me. It is, however, about the gentleman sitting across from me. He's a professional bassist who toured with Frank Sinatra, The Tonight Show. He's played with the best of the best: Tony Bennett, Peggy Lee, Helen Reddy, Andy Williams, and the list goes on and on. You forgot about Andy Williams, didn't you?
I forgot about Andy Williams.
You see my point? So you have probably heard him multiple times and don't even know it. He's on soundtracks like Jaws 2, or The Little Mermaid, or The Love Boat. So he's got a million stories to share, and thankfully he's agreed to share some of them with us. So cozy up, turn off your cell phone, because you don't want to miss this. Let's spend half an hour together getting to know a little bit more about a man I'm proud to call my friend and my bassist, Mr. Don Baldini.
Hello, Frances.
So welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for doing this.
It's a pleasure that somebody wants to hear some of the old stories from the old days of the music business.
Are you kidding? Okay. I just wanted to do this as a little chit-chat because I know what happens after a gig or after a rehearsal, sometimes during a rehearsal, where the stories start to flow. And I see you as sort of a guy with a stream of consciousness, almost like watching Robin Williams in comedy. You have one music story after another.
Well, I was Where's Waldo, you know, the Waldo who's always in the background looking at the thing. Standing next to the bass became like the barrier between me and what was going on. And it kind of gave you a way to sort of stand back from the scene and yet be the observer.
I hope you don't mind if I just throw out some names. And
sure, whatever.
But feel free to say whatever you'd like.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I was very, very lucky. I got to play music and be at some situations like President Reagan's second inaugural, and playing in Monte Carlo for Sinatra with honoring the Grace Kelly Foundation, et cetera, Academy Awards, things like that most people could only dream about. And I never really frankly pursued, but they just kind of happened. You just kind of fall into these situations. So I was very, very lucky. A lot of it's being in the right place at the right time.
Well, you're also very modest, and so luck is only part of it. I mean, any of us who have played with you or have listened to any of your recordings know that luck is part of it, but you had to bring what you brought. So let me start at the top, because when you hear musicians say they played with this one, they played with that one, sometimes it's that they were on the same stage with somebody, they opened for them, they played one time as a sub. When you and I are in this show talking about who you played with, we are talking about people, as you put it, who gave you a paycheck. You really played with these people. Now, I just want to start with the most obvious one, Frank Sinatra. Tell me what you want about Frank Sinatra.
Well, first of all, I never took for granted that opportunity. Every night, no matter where we were, from the White House to, Royal Albert Hall in London or Carnegie Hall in New York, I always, literally as I was putting on my tuxedo, saying, "You're one lucky son of a gun to get to do this." I mean, I never, ever ho-hummed it like, "Oh God, I got to go to work tonight." It was always like, "Boy, you are really lucky," because I was. I mean, I was not only playing with probably maybe the greatest singer of all time, one of the greatest entertainers of all time, but also playing probably the best arrangements that have ever been created for a singer, bar none. I mean, Nelson Riddle, Don Costa, Gordon Jenkins, the list goes on and on and on. And, there was never anything that came close to that. So I did appreciate it.
Explain for just a second, for people who might not know this. What does it mean when you say, I'm playing great arrangements?
Well, there's a difference between composing and arranging. A composer comes up with a new idea, with a new tune, so to speak. Mm-hmm. An arranger takes something that already exists. A song, for example, like I've Got You Under My Skin. I picked that one because what Nelson Riddle did on that particular arrangement is probably the greatest meshing of voice, vocalist with band that's ever happened. And that arrangement, that song has been done by almost every singer, but the way Frank did it and the way Nelson arranged it for him, it was magical. And Frank had an appreciation of arrangers, an appreciation that I don't think any other singer I've ever worked with did. He always mentioned the arrangers. He held them in high regard. He always respected the arrangements. He never fooled around with them. A lot of times the arrangements were based on his placing a word in a particular spot, so rhythmically it was like literally part of the arrangement. Yeah. He never fooled around with that. The thing that I'm always amazed at is when I hear the people today like trying to imitate Sinatra, and a lot of them are pretty good at it, but they don't get the fact that he never messed with it. He left it alone. He never got too cute. Yeah, he changed words around and, he did that, but he never messed with the arrangements.
And his phrasing was impeccable.
His phrasing was impeccable.
When he was singing to you, he was just telling you a story. And you felt like he was singing just to you. Yeah.
Yes, and one never appreciates that listening to recordings. But when you see him in person, and you realize how the minute he walks on the stage, it doesn't matter if it's royalty sitting in the audience, or if it's the President of the United States, or if it's just us. Mm-hmm. He touches everybody in the same way. And interestingly enough, men liked him as much as women did.
Yeah, I think that's rare.
It is rare.
For sure, but he was a rare talent. Will you tell the story about how you ended up playing with Frank Sinatra?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I started the music business as a symphony orchestra musician, and eventually moved to Las Vegas, where I had a job literally before I moved there. I got called from the Harry James Band, and I was offered the job on the telephone.
Yeah, of course.
And it's funny because the agent didn't even ask me anything about my musical background. He asked me what size coat I wore because they furnished, the clothes, and I was the right size.
You were the right size. You got the job.
So anyway, I played with Harry James in Las Vegas for 2-3 years, and at one point, Caesar's Palace decided. Well, first of all, Frank had a big incident in Las Vegas at the Sands, where he and Dean Martin were gambling, and they didn't like the fact that the dealer wasn't using a single deck. They were using what's called a shoe, and they had an incident. And I wasn't there. This is just speculation, but I read a lot of newspaper accounts. Apparently Frank pulled a gun, et cetera, et cetera. So he was banned from Nevada. In fact, he lost his interest in the Cal Neva Lodge, of which he was part owner. Wow. So anyway, I think a year or two went by, and the entertainment director at Caesar's Palace somehow had enough pull with the gambling board in Las Vegas, which controlled everything. Well, actually, the state of Nevada, not just Las Vegas. And they decided, wouldn't it be interesting to put Frank back together with the original band he worked with, which was not Tommy Dorsey. He went to Tommy Dorsey after Harry. After Harry. Harry heard him singing at a place called the Rustic Cabin in New Jersey with the Hoboken Four, which was the original group he was playing with. And Harry hired him literally on the spot. And his first couple of hits, All or Nothing at All, I can't think of another one, but that was a big hit.
Yep.
And so anyway, I was playing with Harry at the time. Yep. And so this opportunity came up, and Harry, of course, said yes. And it's interesting because we didn't rehearse in Las Vegas. Frank had a connection with Warner Brothers because his record label, which was called Reprise, was on the Warner Brothers lot. So we went, the whole Harry James Orchestra went from Las Vegas on buses to Hollywood. We had stayed at one of the old hotels in Hollywood, and we went to the sound stage and rehearsed with Frank for the better part of a week for our opening at Caesar's Palace. So Frank, at that point, was thrilled for a couple of reasons. He loved being back with Harry again, but Harry also had the drummer who was with Count Basie for many, many years, named Sonny Payne. Mm-hmm. And Frank had recorded with Basie some of his favorite engagements at the Sands were with the Count Basie Orchestra, where Sonny Payne was playing drums. He loved the way Sonny played the beat. Yep. And of course now Sonny was with Harry as his drummer. So there I was next to his favorite drummer. And so he kind of got used to the sound of the rhythm section. And years later, for some reason, he let his bass player go. They were at New York at Carnegie Hall, and somebody in New York was filling in. I happened to know Joe Parnello, who was Frank's conductor. We were paisans, that never hurts in the music business. And I don't know how it came up, but Joe Parnello said to Frank, remember the guy that played in Vegas? He's available. And so I got a phone call from Joe, and he said, Frank wants you to come and play in New York. We're at Carnegie Hall, and you have to be here tomorrow. And the funny thing is that I was still am, a big Celtics fan, and I had the tickets sitting up on my bulletin board right above my phone for the next night, which was the Celtics' first game against the Lakers. I'm trying to think of what year it was.
In the playoffs?
Yeah, the playoffs. And I kind of said, well, can I come? I'm starting to negotiate about when I can arrive because I wanted to go to this Celtics game. And he said, no, you got to be here. You got to take the red eye, which was like typically a midnight flight leaving LA and getting to New York, some ungodly hour in the morning. And then there was, what about the instrument? Well, in Los Angeles, we had something called cardage, which if you played a large instrument like this one, you had your instrument with a service that would deliver it to the studio. So I had my bass with the cardage service. So, Joe Parnello, who was the conductor, he said, tell the service to take it to Flying Tigers. They're an air transport freight company. They'll bring it to New York, blah, blah, blah. Tell them to bring it to Carnegie Hall. So I did, and I arrived in New York the next morning. I had no rehearsal. I met with Joe for about 15 minutes at Carnegie Hall. We went to see that my instrument arrived, but I had no rehearsal with Frank. Joe warned me about a couple of things, and that was it. I guess my audition was right there on the stage at Carnegie Hall. It's kind of like in sports when they trade you to another team, you go out there and put on your glove and play the game.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No.
Well,
pressure.
It's funny. I wasn't nervous because I knew I had played and listened to that. Well, first of all, I'd listened to that music as a kid. You're a young Italian kid. Every time a Sinatra song came on the radio, you sang along with it.
Right.
We all did that. I had a lot of his records. I had worked with him that time with Harry. And so it just wasn't that big a deal. So to be honest with you, but besides the Harry James connection, there was one other time. Frank was going to perform at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles, and I think it was for several days. And for some reason, his bass player couldn't make at least one of the rehearsals. It was like, I remember it was like almost an all-day thing. So Joe Parnello, who was this conductor who I had played with Vic Damone, and also Joe used to play at a little club in Encino, and I used to play bass with him. And so anyway, Joe called me, and I was available, so I went there and sobbed, and Frank said, it's nice to see you again. The one thing that struck me about that Universal engagement was that his voice wasn't the same as I remember it being years before in Las Vegas. It wasn't...
It had deepened, or...?
Well, it just was a little more shaky is not the right word. It just, it had aged.
Not as strong.
It wasn't as secure as it used to be. But it still was good. But I do remember that I thought, oh my goodness,
But that's where it paid off for him to have all the experience he had and to be the kind of singer he was, is that even as he aged and his voice may not have been at its strongest, he still delivered to packed houses in a way that other vocalists, very few vocalists can do. I mean, you've got Aretha Franklin, Barbra Streisand, maybe in that category, and Frank Sinatra, who have these long careers, like yourself, who are still playing actively. And so I have two questions for you. The first is it true that you almost didn't take that Carnegie Hall gig because of the Celtics game? That's
true. I was trying to negotiate if I could come a day or two later so I could see that game in person. So here, there's a funny sort of ending to that story, though. So now, all right, so I'm in New York. I land. They send actually a limo to pick me up at the airport.
Sure.
I go to the hotel. I grab a few hours sleep. I meet with Joe Parnello in the afternoon, and he says, we're not going to have a rehearsal, but don't worry. And he just kind of, I guess you wouldn't call it a warning, but he just wanted me to know, in this particular tune, we vamped, like the first 8 bars were never quite, when Frank comes in, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I got through the first show just fine. And at the end of the show, I never realized that I would have to meet with his financial person, who was this lawyer named Mickey Rudin, who was the lawyer and financial advisor to Judy Garland and Marilyn Monroe and, yada, 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 many, many, many people. And I remember him offering, he wrote down a figure on a piece of paper, said, this is what we'd like to pay you per engagement. But I was savvy, and I knew that Frank was only working about 20 or 25 weeks, if that much, out of the whole year. Maybe not even that much. So I wrote down another figure, which was not half as much, but like, say, 2/3 as much. I said, this is what I'd like to have, but I want to get paid year-round. Mm-hmm. And I knew that was wise for a couple of reasons. A musician's pension.
For sure.
And the fact that I would get a check no matter what, that I could still be doing. And so he said, that's fine. Mm-hmm. So that was it. And so I thought I could go back to the hotel now and watch the Celtics. And as it turns out, I'm coming out of the dressing room, and the next thing I know, it says, Frank goes like this, come on, we're all going across the street to the athletic club. My friend Mr. So-and-so is taking us out for dinner. And I'm going like, oh no. So I walk up to Mr. So-and-so, who I'd never met, and I think he was a Middle Eastern guy, because I said, whatever his name was, I said, I don't want to be rude, I've never met you, but I really love the Celtics, and they're playing against the Lakers tonight, and I really want to watch it. He said, I'll take care of you. So we go to the athletic club, we walk in the door, and they start walking towards whatever, I'm guessing the dining area, and he gives me the key to his suite.
Yeah.
And he said, go up on this elevator, when you get to such and such a thing, the door will open, and that's the suite. The entire, I had never been into somebody's place where the elevator door opened into where the living quarters were.
Sure, yeah.
And I said, really? He said, yeah. So I go up there, and of course it's the penthouse. And so I sit down, and within seconds, there's a knock on the door, and I go to the door. I figure, okay, there's a change of plans. And here's this room service guy, and he said, Mr. So-and-so sent me up to ask you what you wanted for dinner. And I'm going he said, well, here's the menu. And I'm going oh my God. And I said, well, I don't know what to do. He said, order anything you want. I said, all right. So I think I ordered, I tried to be somewhat cool and not go crazy. But I ordered salmon or something or other. And there's this big screen TV, and the next thing I know, the food comes up, and there's a bottle of champagne, which I did not order. And so that's how I spent my first evening in New York, playing with Frank Sinatra and getting to watch the Celtics.
Oh my gosh.
In a pretty nice situation.
And that's almost a line from one of his songs, order anything you see. The drinks and the laughs are on me. So
exactly.
Pretty impressive. How old were you?
Oh boy. That's a good question. I was probably It's probably in my 40s. Somewhere in there.
You know, you started off talking about Harry James and blew by it like, oh, you know, I played with Harry James for, I don't know, 2-3 years. For most musicians, just playing with a Harry James, a Glenn Miller, you know, a Tommy Dorsey,
well, that
would have been it.
All right, that's a funny story too, by the way, because I flew out to Las Vegas. I never met Harry. Yeah. I got the suits. We had 2 different suits, you know, and they both had vests that were reversible. And things like, you know,
vests, to get the mileage out of them. Okay.
So we could, and one suit was blue, and one suit was black, and no, excuse me, one suit was gray, and one suit was black. So we could wear the black
daytime,
jacket with
clothing.
the gray pants, etc.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, you know, and his name was Pee Wee Monty was the manager, a great guy. He'd been with Harry forever, and I said, so what's the deal? You know, he said, well, be here at such and such a time, and you'll get to meet Harry. And I said, okay. So I get there. I'm sure it's cool to tell this on. I get there, and
let's hope.
I meet the lead alto player, and first thing he says to me, come on out to the car. I've got some amazing marijuana.
Oh, no. Oh, that's legal now.
And I said, okay. So we went out to the car and got pretty stoned, and I walked in, and I met Harry. And I finally said, is there any music to look at? And Harry says, oh, I've got some bad news. The last bass player, his name was Red Kelly, by the way. There's a whole aside about him. He wound up actually running for governor in the state of Washington on a party called the Owl Party. And their logo was for people who give a hoot.
Oh, no.
I'm not kidding you. This is, I swear to God.
Okay.
And anyway, he said, well, Red got his bass stolen in New York.
Oh.
And the music was in the back. So we're getting all the bass book recopied, but you're just going to have to wing it.
Oh, my gosh.
And I said, really? Now, look at, you know, I was born in 1940. That music of the big band era was kind of before my time. But luckily for me, Harry was only doing a few of his big hits from the big band days. He basically had Ernie Wilkins and Neil Hefti, who were 2 arrangers that arranged for the Count Basie band.
For sure.
Arranged stuff for it. Was the Harry James band of the 1960s, because it was 1964 that I joined the band. It was like a white Basie band.
Yep.
That's why he had Sonny Payne as the drummer.
Right.
So I knew most of those charts. But it's funny, my first night on the band, we're standing there.
With no music.
With no music, and I'm looking at the left hand of the piano player, and I'm trying to use my ears. And to be honest with you, if I have a weakness musically, I'm not one of those bass players that's super intuitive about chord changes. I have to really work at it. And I don't trust myself. More times than not, I will second guess myself being correct, and my second self guessing incorrect. And so I often am my worst enemy. So anyway.
Well, now, just to give you a moment there, and to say that, you know, in full disclosure, we work together musically as well. And I would never have guessed that about you. You are always Johnny on the spot back there.
Well, thank you.
So whatever
I've gotten better. But anyway.
Yeah, you'll do, Don.
So now we're like halfway through the show, and Harry's on the microphone, and he said, and now we're going to feature our new bass player on a tune called Green Onions. Now I'm going like, what?
Oh, no.
Thank God one of the people I went to school with was Booker T. Booker T came to Indiana. He was already a big star. He had already had Green Onions as a big hit.
Yep.
But he came to Indiana University to study trombone, believe it or not. And I got to know him some. And I knew that tune because we all knew that tune because he was our classmate.
Good thing.
So I thought to myself, oh my God, is Harry trying to embarrass me or what's going on? So I decided, well, you know, this is where my Italian kicks in sometimes. Instead of being fearful, I get to kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to show you.
Did your heels
So I go out there and I lower the mic, and they start playing this tune. And in those days, I used to solo a lot with the bow. And so I did, and I started doing all this stuff.
Arco,
At the end, I said, I've got a quiver here that the bow goes into. I kind of threw my bow into the quiver, and like a ta-da, and the people loved it, and Harry loved it, and whatever I did, I don't remember a note of what I played, but apparently I had enough moxie or enough, nerve.
And I heard that you walked right up front with a bass.
I walked right up front. That's it. Yeah.
The whole bass
I walked up front next to Harry, which I don't think he was expecting. I thought, well, if I'm gonna make a fool of myself, I'll do it in a grand manner. But that sort of endeared me to Harry, and we kind of became good friends.
I knew that you would have all these stories, and we haven't touched the tip of the iceberg. It is a stream of consciousness, but before we wrap this up for this show, because I would love to ask you if you would do more of this. I mean, you've got a short list of, just read your short list of people that you jotted down this morning.
I was trying to think, but I completely forgot about Andy Williams, who I worked with initially at Caesar's Palace, but then towards the end of Andy's career, shortly actually before he died, I went on the road with him, and we traveled around the Midwest, and we wound up at the Kentucky Derby. So whatever time of year that is, we wound up playing for whatever it was.
May, I don't know. I'm probably
But Peggy Lee, Johnny Mathis, who I worked with a lot, Tony Bennett, Paul Anka, who he lived in Las Vegas, and I was on a couple of his hit records. Helen Reddy, who I worked with pretty much exclusively the first year or so I was in Los Angeles. In fact, a quick story about her is she came backstage one night when my friend Tom Hensley was playing piano, who I'd known from Indianapolis and also from Indiana University. And another good friend of mine, Mike Berkowitz, was playing drums, who I actually talked to this morning. He was a conductor for Marvin Hamlish and made all these orchestra connections. So Mike has been the Pops conductor for a lot of different orchestras. But anyway, we were the rhythm section. And Helen came back and said, I've got this song, I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar, and Numbers Too Big to... We went, are you kidding? That's the corniest thing we've ever heard. Well, it shows you what we knew, because that became not only the song of the day, but a song that basically backed up a whole movement. Vicky Carr, people, I don't know if they remember, Ann Jillian, Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet, I worked with them a lot.
I know that this list just goes on and on, but we've run out of time, actually.
Okay.
But I will ask you, would you be willing to come back and share some more stories?
Absolutely.
You would, good. So I hope you've enjoyed this half hour with Don Baldini as much as I have. And look again on YouTube for Basslines, and we'll be back with more.
Basslines is sponsored by Hug Your Money. Busy life, retirement decisions? We know how it is. Let us help you maximize, prioritize, and strategize, so you can start enjoying your next chapter. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented. For more information, visit hugyourmoney.com.